So let's dive into one of the biggest puzzles in all of ancient history. We've got Alexander the Great, right? This is the guy who conquered pretty much everything from Greece all the way to Central Asia. He gets to the edge of the known world, to India, and then he just stops. The big question is why? What happened?
I mean, really, what does it take to stop an unstoppable conqueror? What kind of force, what kind of king could make the most successful military machine the world had ever seen just turn around and go home? That's exactly what we're going to dig into today. And believe me, it is a story with two very, very different sides.
Okay, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage for this massive collision of worlds. Then, we're going to look at the official story, the one that made it into all the history books. After that, we'll flip the script and explore the counter-narrative, a completely different take on what went down. We'll put the evidence side by side and then try to figure out why this one moment became the absolute end of the line for Alexander.
All right, let's jump back in time. The year is 326 BCE. Alexander of Macedon has been on an absolute tear for years, conquering kingdom after kingdom. And now he's standing on the banks of the Hydaspes River, staring at the gateway to the Indian subcontinent.
And you have to appreciate the sheer momentum this guy had. For nearly a decade, his army was basically invincible. They toppled the mighty Persian Empire, they took Egypt, they pushed through the mountains of Central Asia. By the time they arrive in India, their reputation is legendary. They are, for all intents and purposes, an unstoppable force of nature. But there's someone waiting for him, King Porus. And let's be crystal clear, this is not some minor ruler. Porus is the real deal. He leads a powerful, well-trained army, and he's a brilliant strategist. He actually chooses to fight during the monsoon season, hoping to use the mud and rain against Alexander. Oh, and he has a secret weapon, something Alexander's men had never really faced before: war elephants. We're talking about living, breathing battle tanks. So, what happens when these two forces finally meet? Well, first, let's cover the official story. This is the version you'll find in most history books, the one recorded by Greek and Roman historians like Arrian and Plutarch. In this telling of the story, the Battle of the Hydaspes is a hard-fought but definite victory for Alexander. Sure, the war elephants cause absolute chaos at first, but Alexander's tactical genius wins the day. Porus himself fights like a lion, refusing to give up even after he's wounded. And this is where the story gets really famous. When Porus is captured, Alexander is so impressed by his courage that he asks how he wants to be treated. And Porus gives that legendary reply, like a king. Alexander respects this so much, he not only gives Porus his kingdom back, but he actually adds more territory to it. It's this incredible story of mutual respect between two great warriors. And to be fair, there is some strong evidence for this version. All these surviving ancient writings we have tell this same basic story. On top of that, we have actual physical proof. Alexander minted commemorative coins to celebrate this very victory. So, case closed, right? Well, maybe not. Because now we have to talk about the other side of the story, the counter-narrative. This is the version that looks at the official record and basically says, hold on a minute, this sounds a lot more like good PR than actual history. You know that famous Napoleon quote, "History is a fable agreed upon"? Well, proponents of this counter-narrative would argue the Battle of the Hydaspes is a perfect example. They tell us to look past what the historians wrote, and instead look at what Alexander and his army actually did right after this so-called great victory. This version tells a very, very different story. It says the Indian resistance was ferocious from day one and that Alexander himself was wounded. His troops were absolutely horrified by the war elephants trampling men and horses and by these massive Indian longbows that could fire arrows that punched right through their armor. They argue the battle was a complete bloodbath, a catastrophic event that, in the words of one ancient writer, took the edge off the Macedonians' courage. And here's the real kicker. This experience so shattered the army's morale that just a short time later, they mutinied. They flat out refused to go any further. It wasn't just a retreat. It was, for all practical purposes, a strategic defeat. So how is that possible? A glorious victory on one hand, a campaign-ending disaster on the other. How can both be true? Well, it all comes down to how you interpret the facts. Let's look at that crucial decision to give Porus his kingdom back, plus more. The traditional view says it's an act of grace from a confident victor. But the revisionist view asks a pretty simple question. Why would a conqueror who just won a huge battle immediately give everything back and then some? Their answer, it wasn't respect. It was basically a ransom. They believe Alexander's army was so beaten up, he had to buy them a safe passage out of a really bad situation. And then you have the mutiny. This is the moment that definitively ends Alexander's conquest of India. The traditional story says the soldiers were just exhausted, homesick, and they were spooked by rumors of the massive Nanda Empire up ahead. But the revisionist take is that it wasn't about fear of the unknown. It was about the trauma of what they had just survived. They barely made it through the battle with Porus and his elephants, and they simply refused to face that kind of horror ever again.
So whether you call it a tactical victory or a strategic disaster, one fact is absolutely undeniable. The Indian campaign was the end of the line for Alexander the Great.
No matter how you slice it, this encounter drew a line on the map. It was the absolute limit of Alexander's march to the east. His dream of conquering the world effectively died right here. And when you look at what was waiting for him just over the horizon, you start to understand why. Because waiting for them across the Ganges River was the Nanda Empire. And according to Greek sources, they could field an army of 200,000 infantry, backed by tens of thousands of cavalry and thousands more war elephants. For Alexander's exhausted and demoralized soldiers, this wasn't just another battle. It was an unimaginable, unbeatable threat. Ultimately, this whole story is just a powerful reminder that conquest is never simple. It shows how fierce local resistance, terrifying new weapons, and the sheer psychological toll of war can combine to stop even the most legendary invading force in history. You see, Alexander never officially lost the Battle of the Hydaspes, but he lost his momentum, he lost the will of his army, and he lost his chance to conquer India. So was this the greatest defeat of his career, just cleverly disguised as a victory? It's a question that really challenges how we define winning and losing, and it's something historians will probably debate forever. Thanks for joining us.